I found my way home across the Grand Mirage.
Yes, it's the Allison Arngrim Show, and I'm Allison Arngrim. Okay, some of you may remember me as Evil Nellie Olson, but tonight I'm Allison Arngrim, and this is the Allison Arngrim Show. And here on the Allison Arngrim Show, we talk about things that make you feel good, the TV shows and the movies that made us feel good, and the people who made them, and people who are doing things now to make the world a better and more interesting place. And I have like one of the most interesting people that anyone's brought me in ages. Like, you need to talk to this guy. And I start reading this. I'm like, wait, what? He's how old? Wait, what the, what? And I read his book. Okay, excuse me, one of his books, because he's 4 years out of college, but he's got his second book out. I'm just, so JD Slajchert, okay, just to, his 8,000 page resume, but just the basics. He is an American novelist, public speaker, philanthropist, and screenwriter. 3 months after graduating from college, his debut novel, MoonFlower, was published in 2018. Yes, I know all of my friends who are writers trying to get published 3 months out of college. No, please don't kill him. Please don't hurt him. We love him. But he's amazing. He did all this very young. And he's been on this speaking tour about, yes, his career as a college athlete. Here's the crazy part. He was playing basketball. He's a basketball player. But then he's an author. And yeah, he did write a screenplay about it. And then he, of course, has the second book. He also there's a whole organization called the Luke Strong Foundation for sickle cell anemia. And it goes on and on and on. And all of the different things he's done. And the other charity's official ambassador for the American Red Cross. It goes on and on. Yeah, more. In American Red Cross, Modern Woodman Fraternal Financial, and working with local politicians such as the mayor of Calabasas, the mayor of Malibu. This goes on and on and on. And oh, by the way, he writes everything by hand. Oh, he can type and like owns a computer, but he likes to write things by hand. I am mind blown, and I've just now met him, ladies and gentlemen, JD Slajchert.
Wow, Allison, I really don't think I've gotten a better introduction than that in my 4-year career, I guess, like we talked about. But seriously, that is so touching. It's such an honor to be on your show. I mean, my goodness, you're so accomplished. You have such an amazing spirit and personality, and I just feel so lucky to be able to meet you too and speak with you. And then this has been something I've been looking forward to for some time. So I can't wait to get into it.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. I am amazed. So you literally, you were in college, but you were an athlete. You were a star basketball player. And next thing we know, you're cranking out books and speaking all over the world. What got you started? What got you going that in college you could have just said, well, I play basketball. Many people are extremely successful at that. That's quite a lucrative career. Could have done that, could have done 1,000 things. When did you take this turn in college to went, I'm going to do this completely other thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I get a lot, and I still, have to sort of formulate like some sort of coherent answer, but because it kind of felt like it happened just so naturally. But there's a few different reasons, but the sort of first one, which is pretty simple, is there was a girl, and that was sort of the
well, okay. Don't all stories start
yeah,
like
right.
that?
I went to see about a girl. That's kind of how my story began, but. Yeah, I mean, and basically, kind of the more sort of detailed answer about that really is just that I think as an athlete you're so regimented, you're so dedicated, and your sport really is your life and it's your identity. And to be able to compete, at the Division I level is, I mean, a really unique circumstance and opportunity, and one that I took very seriously. But I ended up actually getting hurt my sophomore year of college. I broke my ankle, and I think it was sort of a blessing in disguise, because it's without the sport that I'd known sort of my whole life, I ended up getting exposed to like this new group of people that had this like different way of living, and kind of they saw the world through like a different lens. And I was just so creatively sort of inspired by them without even realizing it. And then once I returned to sports, I sort of missed this separate life I'd started to build. And this girl just sort of really opened my eyes to like, hey, she was trouble. We were like going out and exploring. And we used to actually write letters to each other all the time. And that's actually how the handwriting of my career began, was between letters between her and I. And my first book, MoonFlower, is sort of about a kid who is going through the discovery that he's in love with his best friend. And that was the story I sort of wrote about me and this girl. And yeah, so that was sort of the beginning, I guess, of my writing career.
Quasi autobiographical, but yeah, that's true. A lot of my interesting stories with, well, I met this guy, and then chaos ensued. But now, how did Luke Strong, this whole thing, the sickle cell anemia, Luke Strong, how did that start? Because that started during college too. That was
exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And that's an amazing segue, because just as the story in real life was playing out between me and this girl, there was also this separate story that was playing out during my career, where I had this, and it dates back all the way to my high school days. So I grew up in Southern California, and UC Santa Barbara is where I played in college, which is only about, an hour and a half drive away from each other. So I was a fairly local kid. But back in high school, I was running around, and I was this sort of wild, crazy redheaded kid who just was like, the loudest kid in class and pretty much only cared about myself. And after one of my high school games, this girl who I'd never met before came up to me and said, "Hey, my little brother is your biggest fan, and he really wants to meet you." And I sort of was like, sure, I'll get around to it when I can. Like, I'm pretty busy. I'm kind of a big deal, And again, I was 17 at this time.
Oh my God, you're 17. No, I'm far too cool to talk to someone's kid brother. Please, I have things I'm doing. Yes.
And she actually kind of looked at me and she said, "No, it has to happen next week." And that was when I sort of said, "Well, why?" And that was the moment when she said, "Because my little brother is 6 years old and he has something called sickle cell disease. And the last thing that he wants to do before he has to go into the hospital for a full year of isolation for a bone marrow transplant, is meet you and play basketball with you." And that was the time I met Luke Bodden, who that foundation is named after. And for the next 4 years, we were like inseparable. And he used to come to all my games in college once he got out of the hospital. And him and that girl I'd mentioned that I'd met in college, they were close. And so the book was equally inspired, like both parts by Luke and then my relationship with this girl. So that's why it was so kind of fitting you asked about the Luke Strong Foundation, because that sort of those two things were equally playing out, and they were surrounded by my basketball career. So
now, did you start Luke Strong yourself?
No, so Luke's parents founded the Luke Strong Foundation in 2016 after Luke passed away from sickle cell disease complications. And he was only 10 years old, and it was an incredibly devastating loss, and one that, I was actually just with Luke's brother, who's now 18, yesterday, and we were catching up, and they're like family to me to this day. And I think after going through that really, incredibly tragic experience, that's also what pushed me to write and decide, hey, like, I think there's more for me out there than just basketball. And once Luke passed away, I started writing pretty quickly after that.
It's interesting that how doing something, a charitable or a social work kind of thing, often becomes a springboard. I mean, that's totally kind of similar things happen to me in that when you're an actor, they often ask you to go to different charity events and things. We all went to the Special Olympics, but I wound up then going back every year. And then I'd be at the Friday night party and the thing. And I would go to these things. I said, but some people just went for a few hours and got their picture taken. I said, no, I like this. Could I do more of this? Because this is actually fun. And it escalated. And then, of course, in the 80s, you may know that my friend Steve Tracy, died of AIDS, and I had started volunteering. And that really turned into a very, very big part of my life. Yeah. And these kind of relationships and these kind of going into situations where you're able to help others. And you had a similar thing by being, a basketball star, although it was on a national level, but you were in a position to help a lot of people that you wouldn't have been normally. You were famous enough that you were making a large impact in that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so sorry to hear about the loss your friend too. I mean, that's very tragic, and you know, AIDS is obviously a devastating illness in its own right too. But yeah, you know, Allison, I'm glad you said that, because I felt like at the end of my career, um, and you know, I'd be curious to hear if you have a similar thought. Is like, you know, and by career I mean my basketball career. At the end, I sort of really did realize, you know, when I had, like, let's say 5, 10 games left to play and I knew I was done, I was winding down, the best and most important thing I ever got to do was inspire and help some kids that were really ill or had some tragedy in their lives. And at the end, I was like trying to do as much of that as possible, because you know, I had no idea what was ahead for me. And I got to meet some pretty inspiring people that, you know, were incredible. And sort of what's crazy about that, not to jump too far ahead, but what's been amazing and sort of, again, so unplanned about my, you know, my athletic to author switch was when I started doing so much philanthropy for UC Santa Barbara and so much sort of like public facing representation of the school, if you will, that once I wrote a book, they were like the first ones to, you know, catapult it into everyone's, you know, living room and area. And Santa Barbara suddenly got behind me. And then once the city of Santa Barbara got behind me, then everybody else fell in. I mean, and it just sort of snowballed. And that's sort of what I've been living through ever since. And yeah, it started all with just basketball, but
well, and that's the thing, that it is a similar thing in that, you know, as an actor and entertainer, I've always felt that if you're famous, a little famous, a lot famous, any famous, you have the ability to help other people. You can use that fame to help, to draw attention to charities who maybe aren't getting a lot of money, that people don't know about, causes that people don't know about. You can draw attention to that. And I've always done that. I went around the country to like smaller AIDS agencies, because well, New York and LA, they're all set. You know, Liz Taylor and Madonna are coming, but
right.
Cedar Rapids, Iowa's got a hospice and nobody's coming. So, you know, doing these kind of things. And that's one of the things that I've considered one of the better parts of being famous, is that you can help people. Not everyone feels that way, but I definitely do. And it's interesting how, you know, very selfish people say, what's in it for you? But, you know, these things do pay off in their own way, because absolutely the relationships I found in that work have, you know, changed my life. And then I still do entertainment, but the things that I do just help other people, they're all kind of like a big cohesive thing. They all attach to each other. And that's what you found. It's like, then you go do a book and suddenly, oh, wait, I have these relationships, and they want to read the book. That's completely how it works. Yes. I mean, it's incredible. Now, tell me about MoonFlower, because I didn't read your first book. I read your second book.
Right. Well, so MoonFlower was my debut novel. I wrote it while I was still playing in college. So I started writing it when I was 21, which was pretty, you know, bold, I must admit. You know, I had never written anything of length before that, Allison. Like, I was just a basketball player. You know, I was sort of kind of being a 21-year-old. But I do think the thing that I reflect on, and sort of looking back, I think does make quite a bit of sense, was I was a voracious reader. I loved reading growing up. Like, I think, you know, something I've sort of discovered, I think, looking back too, is that playing basketball and being in such a, I don't know, I would say sort of sport that has got a ton of bravado and testosterone, and very, very kind of, you know, you're around guys all the time. It's the reading ended up being like the escapism and the sort of sensitive, you know, getting out of that just really intense environment. So I'd go and play in these games in front of like 30,000 fans in Texas or Pittsburgh or wherever we were. And then I'd be back at the hotel room reading like Nicholas Sparks. and I just sort of, you know, for years was doing that. And yeah, finally I just had the idea of like, hey, you know, I was actually reading this book that was this so-called bestseller and was a really great novel. And I don't want to take anything away from it, but I remember sitting there reading it and saying, I could write a better book than this. I have a better story than this one. And
you know, people say that, but you actually like did.
Yeah. But I, you know, I just worked at it every day. And I didn't let anything stop me. I actually didn't even tell anyone I was writing it while I was writing Moonflower. And I just wanted to sort of, speak softly, but carry a big stick and like be the person that, hey, I've got a book that's ready to be published, rather than trying to tell the whole world I was writing a book. And yeah, I started writing Moonflower while I was still playing, and it took me 2 years to write it. And the book is, like you mentioned, sort of quasi based on my real life story, where it's about Luke and my relationship with this girl, and it's a story about how this world sort of develops around a character that's a basketball player in college, and how he deals with a sudden tragedy, and how a community rallies around him. And yeah, that's a bit what Moonflower is about. So.
Well, I was thinking about that. I was like, to do all this young, and I mean, yes, I write and I do this, and I keep thinking like, there's not enough hours in the day. And I thought, oh, wait, you probably have enormous discipline from playing sports that would lend itself to that.
I think for sure, and I don't mean to sound like I don't know what the word would be, but just sort of like full of myself or whatever. But I do think like what I lacked in skill or experience as a writer, I did make up for in the discipline. Like I was so sort of in love with the process of saying, okay, this draft is terrible. Now let's take it and make it a little bit less terrible, and then a little bit, and just like being so obsessed with the craft. And I think, I would actually argue, and I tell a lot of people that want to write this all the time, is I think my lack of maybe understanding of the industry or how to write a book actually helped me a lot, because I was able to celebrate these small victories that, and I wasn't a perfectionist, right? Like I had no experience with it. So I was just enjoying getting a little bit closer to a book, a little bit closer. And yeah, I didn't look too far ahead, and I wasn't too hard on myself. So.
But that's very good, because that's one of the hardest parts. The editing is the hard part. And for any writer someone starting writing, to tell them like, no, you're going to have chapters where you're going to go, that doesn't work, and go back or take it out, do that. That's part of writing. They're like, what? It's not perfect the first time I write it. No, it's not. And I think that absolutely, the sport's discipline. And that's the thing, is that's what gets movies made and books done and everything else, is not perseverance. You can have all the talent in the world, you can be the smartest person in the world, if you can't sit down and do the thing, ain't nothing going to happen. And that's why sometimes there are people that go, well, how did they do it? Because they worked harder than they. Yes, are they as smart as that guy? No, but they worked twice as hard. Oh well, happens.
Well, and I would love to hear you attest to this, Allison, but it's kind of what we were speaking about a bit off screen, is this idea, and I talk about this a lot too, is like, as an athlete, you put in so many hours of prep and practice and shoot arounds and all of this, scouting of the team you're playing. But the second that ball goes up in the air, it is all just instinct reaction. And I can imagine, of all the sets you've been on in your life and all the scripts you've read, it all looks great until suddenly that camera starts rolling and you have to react, and things change on the fly. And I feel like, writing books is similar. Like you have to persevere.
And it is, well, with acting, and because I also do theater, and with theater, it's very, very like that. Absolutely going through the character and the thing and the script and the rehearsal is absolutely perfect. But then it's live and it's on stage, and now it's happening. So now it's just happening, and you're in the moment, you're doing it. And the massive, meticulous preparation, all the detail, helps you do that. But then once you're doing it, you're just kind of shot out of a cannon on stage.
Here we go.
So it is a very, very similar process. So that absolutely makes sense. Now, this thing about handwriting stuff, and your publicist was telling me, handwriting. Michael Landon hand wrote all the scripts to Little House on the Prairie that he wrote.
Amazing.
And we didn't have computers then, but people were typing it. He had a big yellow legal pad with his left hand, with the pencil, and he would sit in his dressing room, and he'd come running out and tell us things he was doing. Like, are you writing this now? And then I walked by, and there he is scrolling away, and he would write. I mean, he had obviously staff, and people he'd hand it to, and they would go type it up. But he's writing this all by hand with pencil and yellow legal pads. So there are people who do that. And even now, with all the fabulous technology we have, there are people who handwrite stuff. And I'm a mix. As I said, I love my steno pads and my pens, but I also have my laptop, and I'm fascinated because people have these things that create a sort of a mental process for them to do their thing. You handwrite everything.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, from not just my books, but to my calendars, to my notes, to my schedule. I mean, there's a lot of like sort of, I guess, like obsession I have with that part of what I do. And, you know, it's just, I mean, more like in the simplest way, Allison, the number one thing I can tell you is for me, it's just so meditative. Like the idea that writing a first draft of a book, I can grab my notebook where I have pencil and paper, go to a cafe, get a cup of coffee or 18 and sit there with no phone and no laptop and there's no email and just let the sounds of the world around me sort of influence like the page it's like transcendent. And it's my favorite part about what I get to do. And I would say more practically, I do it for a number of reasons. One being the avoidance of technology, which I mentioned, but also this idea that it actually allows you to, you know, going back to sort of like the discipline of the athlete side, is it allows you to see the progress you're making physically in writing a book. Like you can, you know, see that page 12 exists and it's a real thing. It's like, okay, I'm going to go from 12 to 15. And if you ever get down on yourself, you can just flip back and see how far you're, you know, already made it. On a screen, it's hard to have sort of the understanding of how far along you've gone. And again, that process for me began when I was handwriting these letters to this friend of mine. And I found that, you know, my favorite part of the week was sitting down to write her these letters because she was studying abroad in Rome while we were in college. So I would write her these letters and I would do the same thing. I would sit there and not bring anything with me and end up writing these 3-4 page letters. And it got to the point where I was like, hey, maybe I should actually write a book instead of writing all these letters. And yeah, I ended up doing that.
You were writing, you were going through the process of writing and coming up with ideas, getting out there. And it's fascinating. And your second book, which I have read, Darling, You're Not Alone, again, becomes again about the letters. It starts out like, where is this going? And then it's all about the letters again.
I'm sure you can, now that you've heard sort of a lot of my and researched my background, I'm sure Darling makes a lot more sense where the idea for that came from, given, you know, everything I went through in the beginning. But
and now it's an interesting book, as I said, you know, it's billed as, you know, young adult, but it gets pretty intense. And it starts out as, you know, just a teenage boy who's having angst about life in general and his dad and his family and all these problems. And then it takes like a very weird turn. There is a school shooting described and portrayed in the book. That's one of the things that happens. And it's pretty intense. It's you know, it's like, yep, that's what happens. And it's, you know, it's not like a pretty story. And I read that you did research on this, and I'm just fascinated because a lot of people would balk at that. There's a school shooting in here. But you went there but you researched. What was that like to say, okay, I'm going to do this. This is what happens to these people. Then there was a school shooting.
I think, and again, I can imagine throughout your career, you've had similar thoughts about, you know, projects you've taken on or decided to do, but, you know, art is best when it's bold. And I wanted to make a project that, yeah, maybe some people would take a look at and say, wow, this is just not for me. But I had the feeling that the people that did take the chance and read it and go through it would end up appreciating that even more. And being that, I think everything I write, I try to find a real world application that can hopefully bring some light to something that I think is really important to speak about. And I think the instances of school shootings in the United States is such an alarming thing that I've always wanted to write a book about the very topic. And Darling, You're Not Alone sort of gave me the opportunity to tell a story that involved that. And you know, I'd sort of had the idea for the second half of the novel and sort of the magical realism element with the letters at a different juncture, but then the shooting element was something that I wanted to incorporate into this book because, yeah, like I said, I'm sort of sick of hearing about school shootings and gun violence in the U.S. And but yeah, the amount of research I had to do to put this project together was a severe undertaking. Like, as I mentioned in the acknowledgments, I went and visited Columbine High School, which was an incredibly moving experience, and seeing the memorial and being in the town. And yeah, it's something I'll never forget. And but I thought it was so important for me to do so, given the topic I was writing about.
And when I was reading, I saying, well, this is just suddenly in this book. And then I went, well, wait a minute. Now in 2023, this is the reality for children in high school
Yeah.
and junior high school.
Yeah, and
The
parents to
number,
think about. And yeah, I mean,
the number of kids at this point, I mean, because the numbers of school shootings are so officers, the number of children who actually have survived a school shooting, or had a friend who was
mhm,
in a school shooting,
mhm,
or had a lockdown and were
mhm.
almost in a school shooting, and have drills about school shooters. There's a whole generation of children that have grown up with drills. So this is, in fact, part of young people's day-to-day reality now. So, I mean, for someone my age to read of a school shooting in a book is shocking, but I'm realizing for someone 16, 17, they're like, we've been raised with this our whole lives. Yes, this is part of our reality, is to deal with this kind of stuff.
I don't quote me on these dates, but I believe I do have them all correct. But in 2017, my friends' parents were both shot, and thankfully survived in the Vegas shooting at the Harvest Music Festival. And then in 2018, there was a school shooting in my hometown in Thousand Oaks, or excuse me, not a school shooting, at a bar,
Oh,
uh,
yes, 2000.
Thousand Oaks Borderline Bar and Grill. And then in 2014, the year before I got to Santa Barbara, UC Santa Barbara, there was a shooting at the university. So everywhere I've been and gone, these have just become commonplace. And this is just my experience. These are just people I know. I can't imagine people that have actually gone through these events. And yeah, I was living with a friend of mine when her parents were both shot, and I was actually writing MoonFlower at that time. And I sort of told myself, one day I'm going to come back and write a book about gun violence, because I was so mad at the world when that happened. And yeah, I never forgot it. And I wanted to, do kind of hopefully do some justice to that family and that memory that I had, and wanted to write about it.
And that's because where the book takes us, like turn. It's at that, it's just the letter writing thing. At that, it it starts out very realistic. This is sort of day in the life. Here's this
Right.
teenager, and then really, and then there's this spiritual, supernatural turn. We're like, oh, well,
Yeah.
didn't see that coming. It goes to this other thing. And the whole letter writing thing happens. And you now, in addition to this book, you have also, in addition to the other 47 things that you're doing, like write an opera, knit a piano, you also have this whole letter writing campaign encouraging people, again, the handwriting, to
Yep.
handwrite letters to their friends, to their loved ones, to people they know, and you get out the envelope and the stamp and mail it like real people used to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like I've said, the best thing any author can do is sort of bring something in the real world to life, post or further from the project they create. And that's what I wanted to do with this letter writing campaign. Is then, after people read the book, sort of challenge them to say, hey, go ahead and write something to a loved one, a friend, someone you haven't talked to in a while, because it'll mean more than a text or an email or a voicemail. And the other thing I often hear is people say, "Well, I'm not a writer. Like I don't feel like I'm good enough, or it's a little bit too vulnerable for me to write." But I always tell them it doesn't matter. Like, just the idea of your words landing on paper that can last it forever, and sending it to that person in your sort of own voice, is so powerful and so meaningful. And I think the world is, I really believe in humanity, but I do think we could use a little bit more light nowadays. And I was hoping that this could be something that could maybe spur on some change. And I'll tell you, just this morning, Allison, I was actually reading some of, because people can go ahead and submit their letter on darlingyou'renotalone.com. And I was reading some of the submissions, and I was like almost moved to tears. It was incredible to see the people that had shared their letters with me after reading the book. And they're so touching, and they're so nice. And yeah, it's so cool to see something that I wrote in a book make it into people's lives. But
Well, and during the pandemic, I noticed that sort of people start saying, "Wait, I need to
Yeah.
go get on the phone, get on the letter, reach out to people I haven't talked to in a while because we don't know what's happening. Your friends, you haven't heard from them, nobody's going anywhere, people are getting sick."
Right.
And a lot of people started writing letters and sending cards again and doing
Amazing.
things. And I would think during the pandemic, this letter writing thing would be absolutely like a huge, huge step for people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it can be something that's, again, starts off as so small and so simple. But I think that it's so important, and it's so sort of, I don't know, just it has a shelf life that's so unbelievable. And I think that people should take it seriously. And yeah, again, you don't have to be, someone who writes books for a living to do it. Like I think it can be from anyone, it can be any length. And you'd be shocked at like the response you get from people. And I always try to write letters, to friends and check in on people, because I feel like it means something special. And during the holidays, I write everyone a letter, and they all are like, it's pretty funny. They all go around and read them in like my household, and they're kind of sick of getting them because they're just like, oh my God, here's another 2-page letter from JD for Christmas. Could you give me like an actual gift? But no, it's something I love to do. But
Well, I get fan mail from maybe people,
yeah,
and some of them are very simple. Some are typed, and this is hey, I want an autographed picture. But I get letters, and sometimes I get these beautiful handwritten letters. And we do stage readings in the living room. We'll sit down, and my husband will get up and do a reading. And I mean, sometimes they might be from like a kid in Japan who used Google Translate not very well, and so they're kind of funny. And but they're very heartfelt. So we'll read those, and then some of them are just stunning. And so it's like, well, what can I do? I answer them all. I always do. If someone sends the self-addressed stamped envelope and asks nice, let's get autograph picture. There you go, and I'll write a little note sometimes on the back and try. But reading them, it's I do there's people who don't read their fan mail. There's
I
people who
can't
get
believe that.
letters
Yeah,
and
I
they don't
can't
even
believe
open
that.
them, or they go, well, just send them the postcard thingy with the autograph. What I don't know what the hell they did. They don't do any. I'm like, oh, we get another batch in. Okay, put on some coffee and we'll have the stage reading of the. So if you're writing me letters, yes, we're reading them. We're reading these things. We may be reading aloud. We may giggle at you slightly, possibly, but we are completely enjoying. And we've also had a couple where we laughed and then cried by the end of the letter. So it's yes, letter writing works.
Yeah, well, I think to speak towards the fan mail side is like, I know at least for me in the very beginning of my career, it was a little bit overwhelming. Like I sort of had this I wanted to deny that I could have that type of impact on people. And it was like a little bit too much maybe responsibility, I felt like, to have to even acknowledge it. But yeah, in the end, like I saw kind of how inspiring it would be for like my people I work with, or even my parents, who like, my mom is loves the fan mail, and like I always like bring it to her after, and she gets like such a rise out of it that I'm like, you know what, this is really important. And yeah, I try to write back and do that because it is so cool, and I read them all now too. But yeah,
Well, I would think too, because as you said, you didn't see yourself as this terribly important writer. You said, well, I'm going to just sit down and do the work and do this. You saw yourself as a basketball player who then suddenly was moved to write this stuff. So you're like, oh, am I a celebrity? Are people writing to me? That's very weird. When you first become famous for anything, it's a very strange process. And you're like, well, how do I do this? Do I say, yes, I'm famous now? What does this mean?
it is very strange. I could use your advice and wisdom. I feel like I told my mom, this has been like my favorite admission, is it feels like sometimes I'm walking around town naked.
Yes, yes.
And everyone's just sort of looking at me. And obviously it's not entirely true because I am clothed, thankfully. But it's strange because you're very vulnerable, and you sort of put yourself into these projects, and how much work went into it. But yeah, all of a sudden you're open to criticism and all sorts of things. But
It's just all kind of strange. It's very, very weird. I mean, and then of course me starting so young, I mean, we'll sit around, sit around the middle of the night, turn to my husband, go, what's it like to not be famous? It's, it's very strange. And suddenly all these strange, like, you don't really know them, but they know you, or they think they know you. And some of them seem to sort of know you. They pay close attention, and it's very bizarre. And I guess I adjusted at some point. I went, okay, well, this is how it is. You're not gonna like make yourself unfamous. That would be bad. So it's you do have a responsibility. You have a responsibility. You don't want to be an idiot. But luckily, I mean, you're doing really positive stuff here, and you're doing the letter writing sister school. And as you said, if you can't read all the letters, take them to your mom's house. You know, she likes them.
She
There's
likes
always somebody
yeah,
to read all that.
yeah, for
And
sure.
but there you go. She said the importance of putting out yourself into a written letter and someone reading it. Here are these complete strangers who are doing this and sending them to me. So I'm like, yeah, I'm going to read them. So it does put you in a weird position, but it can be really cool, as you found, because obviously it gives you the opportunity to put books out, to talk to people, I'm seeing the multitude of charities and how much money you've raised for all the different charities you work with. And that's all greatly enhanced by people knowing who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
I
definitely
did
something
tell
that,
people
yeah.
when my book was a hit, because my book did very well, I said, okay, if you go on a book tour and it's going well, like your book is popular and your book tour, the best way I could describe it is being strapped to the front of a roller coaster, and they just turn it on and they keep going. And they don't really stop. Every now and then they slow down as they come back to the starting the station, go, are you hungry? And hand you a sandwich. And you eat that as they throw the lever again, and you go and you continue on the road. You get a snack occasionally, but you're strapped to the front of a roller coaster continuously for several weeks. That's what it felt like to me.
I would totally agree with that. I think that's a really great analogy, and I'm definitely going to use that myself, because it is a weird, it's a very hard thing to describe. And one thing I sort of realized was, like, even seeing yourself so much and like videos and hearing your voice constantly, it's just like overwhelming, and you're just like, wow, like this is strange. But yeah, it's obviously so cool. And like you said, though, too, I mean, the most important thing is the responsibility and opportunity it provides to hopefully give and create new things and new opportunities for those less fortunate. And so I've always tried to ground myself in philanthropy. And I've also had some friends that have achieved like some levels of fame, and that to work with them on doing that sort of stuff, and how we all kind of ground each other, has been awesome. And yeah, but it is odd, and it does feel like I'm on a roller coaster for sure.
It absolutely does. It's so crazy. Now, I also read that JD credits his writing inspiration to many authors of the lauded Lost Generation, and has aspirations of one day living in Paris
Yeah.
himself. Is this true? That's a fabulous line.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, Paris is probably my favorite city in the world. I think they have the best food in the world. Don't tell my stepdad that. He's Italian, so he would lose his mind. But yeah, France is an incredible place. Paris is, I don't know, it just seems like the writer's town. And so like I've mentioned, like you read in the sentence, some of my favorite authors ever were a part of it, like John Dos Passos, Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald. They all lived there during their 20s, and I don't know, that's just something I want to experience and sort of have as like maybe a part of my like kind of life resume, if you will, of having lived there and experienced it. But yeah, we'll see. Hopefully one day I can do an interview with you from there. That would be pretty sweet. But
I'm going there in February again.
Oh my goodness! So you go often?
I do. Well, Little House, La Petite Maison, down the Little House is super popular in France, and they like Nellie Olson. And years ago now, like 2002, I went to do an interview. I went to go be on a talk show, and I found out how crazy they were for the show and for me. And I said, well, I'm getting in on this. And I had always wanted to go to Paris, and I started going. And now I actually am going because I do a comedy show there. I do a whole comedy show
amazing.
With this guy. We do this whole comedy in French, but I wind up spending like a month and a half in France, and I go all over. But what I like to do really on the days off is go hang out in Paris and just walk around, go to the store, go to the movies, eat. Yes, all the food is good. The food that you get off a truck in the street is fantastic. I mean, everything.
I have some of my favorite, like all my favorite clothes I wear are all from Europe. Like I feel like the male attire there is so much more colorful and like fantastic, where
right.
yeah, it's just I mean, yeah, I love it, and they're obsessed with coffee. So anywhere that happens is a great place to be. So
Oh, the coffee, the real coffee, or
yeah,
crack in a cup, as I like to call it. It's yeah. They were like, there was, you want American coffee? No, no, the real thing. Yes, and it's
yeah, give me the real thing.
the real coffee. So okay, so again, so much in common. So what what do you say? Because obviously you probably get this asked a lot and speak probably at colleges. What do you say to young people in college who are like 4 years back behind you, who are saying, well, I don't know, maybe I do want to become a writer. Maybe I want to do something like this and completely change my life and career. What kind of insight and advice do you give to them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one I always take very seriously because I do think I, I've only gotten to where I am off of the sort of belief and support from people that came before me. Like I found in the writing community, it's so tight knit and supportive and just overall warm in that there's not like this competitiveness where they want to, withhold information. And yeah, I feel so fortunate to have had the opportunities I've had where I take it really seriously when someone does come to me and say, hey, like, I want to do that. I want to write. I want to take a story that I have that's really important and put it into a book. And what I always tell them is, kind of some of the things we spoke about. Like number one, don't be obsessed with having a perfect first draft and making this thing that is like glossy and shining right away. And that's not really achievable. And if you do, you do sort of go out and attempt to do that, you're going to fail, and you're most likely won't end up finishing the project because that is sort of the enemy of forward progress, is this idea of perfection. And so I always tell people, like, just complete it, just finish it. And then I always just tell them, obviously, when it comes to like, maybe, well, how do I figure out what book is right for me? It's write about what you know, and read a lot and be sort of obsessed with the craft and look at what others have done that was really successful. And that will help you sort of find your creative voice. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of these things may sound trivial, but I do think that they're very important to keep in mind and rely on. But I also still feel like I'm learning quite a bit, even now. And I try to speak to other writers that have written, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books, and ask them, well, how do you keep that rolling? And I want to do
Going
that.
right, the inspiration. Well, and you're right, because I mean, you mentioned perfectionism, because perfectionism really is the fast way to wind up getting nothing done. Because people who are diehard perfectionists go, it's not perfect, and then just everything just comes to screeching halt. And it's funny because you say, but like, it's a very popular expression in France, and it basically is the best is the enemy of the good.
Yes,
That becoming
for
too
sure.
obsessed with the finished product and being perfect means you don't finish the thing that you could have, that would have been fine actually, and that you have to focus on the task at hand. So see, you'll do very well in France. And what keeps you going now? Because I mean, you've cranked out a second book, you're still going, you're doing these things, you're strapped to the roller coaster for the book tour.
Oh yeah.
um uh how do you stay positive and stay inspired? Because obviously what you're doing with this positivity and these letters, it's hard. How do you stay positive and inspired?
Yoga, hot yoga.
Hot
Yes,
yoga?
I
You do
love
hot
yoga.
yoga?
Yeah.
Ow.
Gotta give a shout out to my yoga instructor, Tony. I was with him this morning. Appreciate you a ton, man. Everyone at Core Power, you guys are amazing. Yeah, I would actually, but seriously, I would say yoga has been something I picked up once this roller coaster began, and I've just become sort of like, I don't know. I mean, I think the best thing I can, or the best way I can describe it is, I sort of feel like I move through the world a little bit lighter every day I go to yoga, and I just find like sort of a calm amongst all of the craziness. And it's really helped me sort of find the energy to keep going and keep finding a new kind of I would say sort of energy in each new thing. And I love it. I'm a big proponent of it. And I would say maybe yoga and coffee, to answer your question.
Yoga and coffee. Big fan of coffee. I'm also discovering, as my doctor keeps saying, more exercise, more exercise. And I am finding out that, yes, every time I get more exercise, oh, wait, I feel better. um, it does work. it's just so amazing. You wrote a screenplay. You wrote a screenplay.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of flirted with your world there for a bit, where I was headed your direction, and then I sort of went back to my books pretty quickly. But
So now, is it being optioned? Is there any hope of this being produced? Is this going to be a thing, or did you just say, "Well, I'm going to do it to do it and see how this goes"?
so my first book was optioned, and then the producers that were interested in working together, they kind of brought the idea to me of me writing the script. And at the time, I had zero experience with screenwriting, or even really knowledge or interest in it. I was a novelist. I was someone who had written a book,
and you were surprised that you were a novelist, and now they're saying,
yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, I was like asked to be this screenwriter, and I got to be honest, it did take me like a full probably 9 months of sort of ignoring those calls and emails, because I was just I think I was in denial about that too, because I think what happened was I just climbed the hill of writing this book, and I was sort of in the Goldilocks zone of everyone reading it and being exciting about it, and then these people want to ask me to write a script, and I'm like, well, wait a second, I just buckled down the last 2 years. Now you're asking me to stop doing my parade tour and write again. And I didn't want to do it. And it was their persistence and their continued sort of asking of like, hey man, you need to write this script and you need to start tomorrow. And then finally just said, okay, but you need to tell me how to do it. And they gave me what was, I think, a really, in the looking back, I think for just my career as a storyteller in general, Allison, they gave me sort of a crash course on storytelling that I really, after even writing my first book, I had never had an education on. I just went ahead and wrote MoonFlower. And then I took like a 4 or 5 month hiatus where I just read and studied, every screenwriting book I could get Robert McKee, Save the Cat, all of them. And I treated it like I was like studying for the SAT, and I just
see, it's that discipline. You get that.
And and then
I also love that you admit that you totally like blew them off for like months.
I did.
Because yes, that's because we all like do that. Nobody admits that. Yeah, they actually were calling me trying to get to do it, and I was returning people's calls.
Well, and I sort of felt like they were joking. I was like,
"They can't be serious."
Yeah, I'm like, I'm just gonna ignore this and just keep rolling on and get back on the roller coaster and not get off of it. But then, yeah, you go around enough times and they keep calling, and you're like, wow, they actually really want me to write this. And so, yeah, so I ended up adapting my first MoonFlower, my first book, and that process was sort of moving forward pretty quickly. And then COVID hit. And, obviously, I'm sure like you and everyone in that industry, things just really came to a screeching halt. And that's when I started writing Darling, You're Not Alone.
Well, then you were almost going to be on my show, and then you got sick. And then exactly. Luckily you got better. I managed to go like over 2.5 years, and then I got it in November. And what's funny is I got better, and I was going to the gym the whole time that I was actually supposed to be like sick in bed. It's like, I just can't. I had to get up, and it's like people went, "You went to the gym and we're doing like treadmill, and you're not sick." And I'm like, it made me feel better. It made me sweat, and I felt better. And I called the doctor, and it's like, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, do that. So exercise and coffee, yeah. All right, so where do people find you? Where do they get the book? And you've got the whole website and the whole how to write the letter thing. Where do they find you and all of this fabulous stuff?
I just let me tap into my my memorized website, like laundry list.
Go into publicist mode.
Yeah, exactly. So for information on me and kind of like, if you remember one website, this is probably the one. It's www.jdwritesbooks.com. There is my personal website. There's information on me. My blog is there as well, and there you can get all my books there and everything. But for my publisher's website, where there's other authors that are under Summerhouse Publishing, go to summerhousepublishing.co, www.summerhousepublishing.co. And then for more information on the letter writing campaign, which Allison was talking about, that's and just Darling, You're Not Alone, my new book in general, you can go to www.darlingyou'renotalone.com. So just the title of the book, and there you can upload a letter where I can read it and interact and respond. And then all my books are available in Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever books are sold. And for social media, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at JD_Slajchert. Yeah, I think that's all of them. But
I think you did, and I think I'm following on everything now. I think I found you and following you. All right, we're gonna wrap up, but wait, you also just recently you said you're getting a typewriter. You're gonna do the handwriting,
yes,
but you're also getting like an actual. Is it manual or electric? You're getting like
it's a manual typewriter. I got it at an antique store in Simi Valley, and they tried to charge me $70 for it, and I negotiated it down to $60. So I was
also loving that you haggle over a thing in a thirst. Okay. So is it an Olivetti? Did you get the Olivetti or is it another thing?
The name escapes me. I do know it's not electric though, so I do have to wind it back. But I took it to Staples and had to get it like re-inked, and yeah, it was like one of the keys was broken and that had to be restored.
Oh, yeah, no, that's gotta be hard.
Yeah, it's a beast, but I love it.
They're very satisfying to write on a weird way. I mean, the problem is
that's the name, Remington.
Carbon papers and liquid paper and those issues. But having written back in the day on a manual, they can be quite satisfying. And then I did learn to type on electric. I was thrilled when they came out with the laptops because it just kind of goes clickety click. It's easier. But there's something very satisfying about the little portable. The old my mother had the Olivetti, which was very popular with writing. So love that. I can't. At some point, I'm gonna have to call you back to talk about how you feel about writing on a typewriter now.
It's the coolest thing ever. The sounds it makes, like I just feel more like a writer every time I use it. But man, like when you mess up and you got to start all the way over, like that sucks. That is a really rough part of it.
Yeah, there's a whole discipline in and of itself. Okay, well, like I said, you have so many things going on, and I think it's just all absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for coming on my show.
Allison, you are amazing. You have such a light. You give back so much. You support all types of artists, and I seriously mean it when I say it was an honor to be on your show. And keep supporting everybody you can, because it means a lot. And it never was missed on me. And I just I had an amazing time tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you all for watching. It is the Allison Arngrim Show, and I'm Allison Arngrim.
I found my way home across the grand